Okay, so let's set the scene. Imagine it. It's the middle of the night in Caracas. We're talking the overnight hours between January 3rd and 4th, 2026.
And it's not a quiet night. The entire city, or at least parts of it, are being rocked by these loud, concussive explosions.
Right. And then you have these reports of military aircraft, and they're flying low. I mean, really low. The kind of sound that just, immediately tells you something is fundamentally wrong.
It's the sound of an intervention. There's no other way to describe it. It's not a drill.
And just as that confusion is peaking, the real shockwave hits. A headline that, frankly, sounds like something out of a Tom Clancy novel.
The United States announces, officially, that it has captured Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro.
And not just, detained him or put him under house arrest. They physically seized him.
Snatched him from his own capital and flew him directly to New York. It's an unprecedented move against a sitting head of state.
The audacity is just staggering. And then, to amplify it all, the messaging from Washington starts coming out.
Right. We get this reported statement from U.S. President Donald Trump, and it's unambiguous.
He says the U.S. will, and I'm quoting here, run Venezuela for the time being.
For now. Until a transition is established. I mean, that statement alone just rips up the rule book.
It takes this from being a wild news story and turns it into a genuine, what you'd call a global order story.
Absolutely. This challenges every norm we have about sovereignty, about intervention, everything. So our mission here in this deep dive is to really cut through that chaos.
You need to figure out what's confirmed, what's still disputed, and what the massive implications are. Because the details, from the tactical side to the legal fallout, they matter immensely.
We have to run this like a fast-paced investigation. You have the official White House narrative on one side.
And the kinetic, explosive reality on the ground and Caracas on the other.
Exactly.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for everyone listening. First, we're going to reconstruct the timeline. The timeline of shock and removal. What happened in those first few hours?
Then second, we'll get into the nuts and bolts. The mechanics of the extraction. How on earth did they pull this off?
Third, we have to look at the justification versus the reality. The justification versus the force. The official story versus the military strikes.
After that, we dive into the legal mess, the legality question. We're talking international law and some pretty serious domestic U.S. problems.
And finally, we'll look at the aftermath, the leadership vacuum and the oil angle. What happens inside Venezuela now, and the resource question that's impossible to ignore.
This is a really high-stakes analysis, so we'll be using confirmed reports from major outlets to build the clearest picture we can.
All right, let's start at the beginning, the timeline.
The timeline.
Segment 1, the timeline of shock and removal. So the core facts coming from places like Reuters and ABC, they really start to solidify in the pre-dawn hours of January 4th.
And the atmosphere in Caracas is just pure tension. The first reports are all about the physical experience. It's visceral.
This is more than just some sporadic gunfire we're talking about, right?
Yeah. Oh, much more. The sources are consistent on this. Major detonations. And the sound of those low-flying aircraft, which suggests, specialized transport, maybe even some close air support right over the city center.
Which tells you the operation was designed to be overwhelming from the very first second.
Exactly. It's shock and awe on a micro scale. The goal is to paralyze any potential response. It wasn't subtle in the slightest.
And then within just a few hours, the U.S. officially confirms it. They have Nicolás Maduro.
And this is a key detail, his wife, Celia Flores, as well.
Why is her capture so significant?
Because it shows the depth of the intelligence. It suggests they weren't just targeting the figurehead. They were aiming to dismantle the entire immediate power structure. It's about removing any immediate successor or rallying point.
So from the capture, the story then shifts to the extraction. And this part seems to be all about political theater.
100%. The reports suggest transport was handled exclusively by U.S. military assets. That's a very deliberate choice.
It reinforces that this is a military operation, not some kind of police action or rendition.
Right. This wasn't a quiet handoff on a runway. This was raw power projection.
And the visual details they chose to release, they are absolutely central to the message they're sending.
They're everything. Sources reported President Trump posting a photo online. It showed Maduro blindfolded and in handcuffs.
And then Reuters had another specific claim, didn't they, about a naval vessel.
They did. Reuters claimed there were photos and reports showing Maduro on board the USS Iwo Jima.
Okay, so for those listening who aren't familiar, what is the USS Iwo Jima? Why is that choice of ship so loaded?
Well, the Iwo Jima isn't just a destroyer or some small patrol boat. It's a massive amphibious assault ship.
So basically a floating military base?
Precisely. It's designed to project power onto hostile shores. It carries helicopters, landing craft, thousands of Marines. It's built for invasions.
So putting a captured, blindfolded head of state on the deck of that specific ship.
It sends an unmistakable message to the entire Western Hemisphere. It's a visceral display of overwhelming force. It says, we can and we will do this.
It's meant to project absolute, undeniable control, to crush any hope among his supporters.
And eliminate any doubt in the minds of the Venezuelan elites or, their foreign allies like Russia or China. The mission is done. It was irreversible.
Okay. So after that initial, very dramatic piece of theater, the narrative begins to shift again.
It does. It moves from military action to legal processing.
From a deck of a warship to a jail cell.
Exactly. The next reported step is his arrival and detention on U.S. soil. He's reportedly moved through New York State and then handed over to the federal system in New York City.
And we have a specific location.
We do. ABC reporting pinned his location at the Metropolitan Detention Center, the MDC, in Brooklyn.
That transition is just fascinating, isn't it? From the symbol of military might, the Iwo Jima, to a federal jail in Brooklyn.
It's a deliberate pivot. The military operation had one goal: get him out. But the political and legal operation have another goal entirely.
To frame this whole thing as the arrest of a high-value criminal.
That's the narrative they need to sell. But that reframing, this crucial pivot from invasion to arrest, it was almost immediately undermined.
By President Trump himself.
By the president himself. The public remarks reported by Reuters. He states that the U.S. will, again, run Venezuela temporarily.
And in the same breath, he connects it to oil.
Right. The sources confirm he's openly discussing plans to restore and, quote, exploit Venezuela's oil infrastructure.
Wow. He just says it out loud.
He does. And that immediately connects all the dots for anyone watching. It just strips away that veneer of a pure law enforcement action.
It exposes the strategic interests underneath it all, the resources, the geopolitical control.
It suggests the operation scope from the very beginning was about way more than just serving a federal indictment.
So when you put all the facts together, the airstrikes, the military seizure, the theater on the warship, and then the open talk about oil and control,
the core reality becomes clear. This was an unprecedented military op designed for regime removal, pure and simple.
And that takes us right into the how. Because pulling a head of state out of his own capital, I mean, the level of planning required for that is just on another level.
It borders on obsessive.
Segment 2, the mechanics of the extraction. So it's not just if it happened, it's how. And the reporting from outlets like Reuters suggests this was anything but an improvised raid.
Oh, not at all. The reporting suggests this was a long time in the making, immensely complex.
What are some of the details that point to that deep preparation?
Well, Reuters confirms it was meticulously planned, heavily rehearsed, and coordinated at the absolute highest levels. This wasn't a snap decision made last week.
This was the culmination of, what, years of intelligence?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
The report specifically mentioned the heavy involvement of special forces.
So we're talking about elite Tier 1 units.
Absolutely. The kind of units trained for what they call hostage rescue or direct action missions. These are defined by extreme risk, speed, and precision, deep inside hostile territory.
And for them to succeed, the intelligence has to be perfect.
It has to be flawless. A delay of half a second, a wrong turn down a hallway, and the whole thing can end in catastrophic failure.
And the planning went beyond just the tactical side. The reports also mentioned the CIA.
Yes. CIA source element was reportedly central to the operation. And that's the absolute precondition for success in a mission like this.
You need someone on the inside.
You need eyes and ears inside Maduro's inner circle. Someone identifying command structures, the safe house locations, the exact timing of his movements.
And most importantly, the weaknesses in his presidential security detail.
Yeah.
The gaps they can exploit.
Exactly. But there's one detail that, for me, just elevates this into a different category of planning.
What's that?
The specific mention of a mock house being used in preparation.
A mock house. So they literally built a replica.
A full-scale replica of the target location. Whether it was his residence, a bunker, an office, they built it. And they rehearsed the infiltration and the extraction dozens, maybe even hundreds of times.
Down to the millisecond, every breach point, every contingency.
It transforms the operation from a raid into a surgical exercise. That's the goal anyway.
But that raises a huge question, a contradiction really. If their intelligence was that good, if they could build a replica and rehearse the perfect snatch and grab.
Then why were the military strikes necessary?
Exactly. Why bomb other facilities? Why knock out the power?
That is the core point of friction here. The operation wasn't just grabbing Maduro and Flores. The reports are clear. There were strikes on Venezuelan military facilities.
Like what kind of facilities?
Air defense sites, command and control nodes, and significantly, there were these major power disruptions all across Caracas.
Okay, so a pure arrest operation is supposed to be quiet, surgical.
As quiet as possible, yes.
Hmm.
Precise. But striking military targets and cutting the power grid, that suggests a much broader objective.
It suggests systemic shock and paralysis.
That's the term. It means they weren't just planning for the extraction itself. They were planning to prevent any effective counter-response from the Venezuelan military, the FANB, during that critical window.
They were afraid of a real fight breaking out.
It suggests a fear of organized resistance, yes. They had to achieve not just speed, but total disruption. Neutralize the military's ability to communicate, to mobilize, to send jets or troops to intercept the extraction team.
It moves it from a capture mission into the realm of a decapitation strike.
It's a classic decapitation strike, yes. And all of this kinetic action was wrapped in that very sophisticated PR campaign we talked about earlier.
The theatrical messaging, the staging was everything.
Look at Trump's reported posts. First, the announcement of success. Then later, that highly provocative photo of Maduro in restraints.
It's psychological warfare.
It is. It's communication designed for multiple audiences at once.
So for the Venezuelan military, the message is what? It's over.
It's demoralization. It's your leader isn't just gone, he is powerless, and we are showing you his humiliation. For regional powers, it's a statement of a new reality. It forces everyone to react.
And then, of course, there's the domestic U.S. audience.
For them, it's a showcase of decisive action against a long-term adversary. And for global rivals, for Russia and China.
The message is, we can get to anyone, anywhere, even your allies.
Exactly. We can penetrate the highest levels of security in a state you actively support. It's what you'd call kinetic messaging. The image of the handcuffed leader on that warship that has more lasting impact than the bombs dropped in Caracas.
So while the exact movements of the special forces will probably stay classified forever.
The unifying fact, the thing that every source agrees on, is indisputable. Maduro was physically seized in Venezuela and removed to New York. The mechanics were effective, ruthless, and highly dramatic.
Which brings us to the third big question. We have the how military intervention. Now, what was the why? What's the stated reason?
And why, if that reason was purely legal, did it require this level of overwhelming force?
Section 3. The justification versus the force. Why now? This is where it gets really complicated, because the U.S. administration is essentially trying to create a legal fiction.
They're trying to say this was an arrest?
While using the physical reality of what looks a lot like a military invasion.
Exactly. And the official legal frame, the entire public story, it centers on these allegations of narco-terrorism.
The drug trafficking networks linked to Maduro in his inner circle.
Right. By framing it that way, they're attempting to bypass the whole thorny political question of sovereignty.
And instead, they appeal to the international legitimacy of fighting organized crime. It sounds better.
It sounds much better.
Yeah.
And we have concrete reporting on this. Both ABC and Reuters confirm he's being brought to New York to face federal drug charges.
Specifically, charges of running a narco-terrorism enterprise. This is the whole narrative pivot the U.S. needs to make this work.
And the media, naturally, helps reinforce that frame. The New York Post, for instance, focused heavily on the indictment itself.
Treating it like the end of a long criminal investigation, not the trigger for a military op.
Exactly. And that helps cement the idea in the public mind that this is about justice being served, not geopolitics being enforced by military might.
But this is where we have to apply some critical thinking. This is where the story doesn't quite add up.
The friction is immense. If this is truly just a law enforcement action executing an arrest warrant, then the scale of the military response is it's wildly disproportionate.
You don't typically need to bomb a country's command centers and deploy special forces to serve a warrant.
No. Even an arrest warrant against a sitting head of state, which is already legally, a minefield, It doesn't justify disabling a country's power grid. That level of force is, by definition, a military confrontation.
Okay, so let's flip it around then. Let's look at it from the other side.
Go ahead.
If it was purely a military action, a targeted invasion to grab the leader and secure the oil, why bother with the courtroom drama in Brooklyn?
That's the other side of the contradiction. Why not just install a proxy government and declare a military occupation? Why funnel the entire outcome into this highly visible, highly risky federal court process?
And that tension, that's what makes this situation so new,
Yeah.
so different.
It's vital for understanding this. The U.S. is arguably creating a new doctrine right before our eyes. We could call it, I don't know, indictment as casus belli.
An indictment as a cause for war.
Yes. Using the perceived legitimacy of a domestic law enforcement process, a federal indictment, as the legal trigger to justify military force that was previously reserved for, acts of war or direct threats.
So lets them say we were just arresting a criminal.
And by saying that, they deflect the charge of invading a country. But the two pieces, the invasion and the arrest, they're fundamentally incompatible under international law as we know it.
They need the legitimacy of the courtroom to mask the illegitimacy of the military action.
Precisely. But that creates a huge risk for the U.S. government, doesn't it?
How so?
Because now their entire rationale, the justification for the whole thing, it hinges on the strength of the evidence they present in that federal court.
So if the evidence is weak or circumstantial,
Or if it relies on, say, testimony from dubious defectors with an axe to grind, the whole operation instantly transforms
it goes from being a justified arrest.
to a flimsy geopolitical pretext for regime change. The military part was a success, but the political success now rests entirely on what a judge and jury in Brooklyn decide.
And that uncertainty is what immediately spirals this into a massive international crisis.
And a legal one.
Section 4, the legality question. And this operation, it's facing fire on two totally separate fronts, legally speaking.
Both are equally critical. First, there's the domestic U.S. oversight of the military. And second, there's the bedrock principle of international law, state sovereignty.
Let's start at home in the U.S. because that failure of oversight is, it's explosive.
It is. Reuters reported that the U.S. Congress was not notified before the military operation happened.
Not notified at all.
That's the report. And it was apparently confirmed by a high-ranking Republican senator, Marco Rubio.
Okay, that's not just a procedural slip-up. That's a huge deal.
It's a fundamental constitutional question. It goes right to the heart of the War Powers Act.
Which requires the president to notify Congress before sending troops into hostile situations.
Right. The executive branch is supposed to consult with and notify Congress before introducing U.S. forces into hostilities. And for an operation like this.
I mean, it involves targeted strikes on a foreign military and kidnapping a head of state. It's an act of war by any reasonable definition.
It is. So the lack of notification suggests a massive executive overreach. It implies the decision to launch this incredibly high-risk operation, one that could have easily provoked a wider war, was made unilaterally.
Just by the executive branch. No oversight.
And that sets a precedent for presidential power that is deeply, deeply controversial inside the U.S. system. It adds a lot of legal fuel to the fire.
Okay, so that's the domestic problem. What about the international one? That seems even bigger.
It is, because it challenges the entire global system. Legal experts almost universally questioned this operation immediately.
And it all comes down to that principle you mentioned, state sovereignty.
Yes. The bedrock of the international system, really since the end of World War II, is that principle.
So for anyone listening, can you just boil down what that means in this specific context?
Sure. It means every state has supreme and exclusive jurisdiction within its own territory. Simply put, one state cannot use military force inside another sovereign state's borders.
Except under very specific conditions.
Very narrow, very defined conditions. And those are almost always limited to explicit self-defense against an armed attack or a collective security action authorized by the UN Security Council.
And neither of those applies here.
Not cleanly, no. The U.S. wasn't under an immediate armed attack from Venezuela, and there was definitely no UN Security Council resolution authorizing this.
So how does the U.S. even begin to justify it legally on the world stage?
Well, governments can try to argue exceptions. They can say that the narco-terrorism allegations made Maduro's regime an international criminal enterprise, not a legitimate government, or that intervention was needed to prevent some greater regional instability.
But does that argument hold water, given the scale of the military force used?
That's the problem. The confirmed strikes, the sheer tactical preparation we've discussed, It makes that defense very difficult to sustain credibly in the court of global opinion.
And the global reaction seems to confirm that skepticism.
It does. The Guardian detailed the reactions, and they were sharply polarized. You had some nations that were happy with the outcome. They wanted Maduro gone, but they still vehemently condemned the method.
So even countries that hated Maduro are saying the U.S. broke the law.
That seems to be the consensus. The U.S. violated international law, regardless of how culpable the target was.
And the UN had to get involved.
Immediately. The UN Security Council was expected to convene an emergency session. And when you get the permanent members meeting on an emergency basis, that is a clear sign that the world sees this as a fundamental threat to the established rules.
But the real lasting damage here isn't a UN resolution, it's the precedent, isn't it?
That is the critical long-term question. Has the U.S. just created a new global rule?
The rule being what? Regime change by force is okay if you have a domestic indictment.
That's essentially it. They've normalized regime removal by unilateral military force disguised as a law enforcement function. That indictment is casus belli idea we talked about.
And the problem is other countries are watching.
Other major powers will absolutely internalize this precedent, and they will cite it when they feel justified in conducting their own interventions.
We're talking about Russia and China.
Specifically, imagine Beijing decides the leader of a country in the South China Sea is engaged in, say, illegal fishing that infringes on Chinese interests.
They now have a playbook.
A direct playbook. They can file domestic charges, announce a warrant, conduct a military strike and extraction, and then turn to the world and say, what? We were just arresting a criminal just like the U.S. did in Venezuela.
It just fundamentally shifts the boundaries of what's considered acceptable.
Global rules change through actions, not just treaties. And this one action has potentially given geopolitical rivals all the justification they need to execute similar operations. It dramatically increases global instability.
And while the world is trying to figure out this new dangerous precedent, inside Venezuela, there's chaos.
A massive power vacuum that has to be filled immediately.
Segment 5, the leadership vacuum and the oil angle. So when a head of state is physically ripped out of power like this, the first question is always, who's in charge now?
And the answer is usually nobody and everybody all at once.
The reporting from The Guardian confirmed that. Immediate uncertainty, competing claims to power.
Right. Maduro's camp, what's left of it, immediately denounced the seizure. They're calling it an act of kidnapping, of imperialist aggression.
And they had to put a new face forward, right, to show some kind of continuity.
Their necessary tactical move, yes. They position Vice President Delcy Rodriguez as the interim leader.
And the goal of that move is purely to maintain a constitutional facade, to prevent the immediate official collapse of the state.
Exactly. But the reality on the ground is always far more precarious than a press release. The sudden removal of a strong man like Maduro, it just unleashes chaos.
You get military fragmentation, right? Different units loyal to different generals.
Infighting among the ruling party elites, who now see a chance to grab power. And then you get this frantic, dangerous rush to control the actual levers of the state.
What are we talking about there? The tangible assets.
The critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
Who controls the state television station and gets to shape the narrative? Who secures the central bank and the cash? Who controls the airports and the borders?
History shows us that in this kind of vacuum, the potential for violence is incredibly high.
Reprisal killings against the opposition, score settling within the regime, military units clashing. It's a tinderbox.
So the real question of stability comes down to the military, the FANB.
100%. Delcy Rodriguez can claim to be the interim leader, but if key generals decide to go their own way or shift their allegiance to another faction,
the country could descend into civil conflict very, very quickly.
Which makes the decisions of those top commanders in the first 24 to 72 hours absolutely critical. Do they follow the supposed chain of command, or do they cut a deal with whoever promises them the most power or immunity?
And the driving force behind all of that decision-making, both in Caracas and, let's be honest, in Washington, it always leads back to one thing.
It leads away from politics and toward resources. The immense, undeniable incentive of Venezuelan oil.
Let's follow the money, because this is where the U.S. narrative feels the most vulnerable.
The Reuters reporting is explicit on this. It connects right back to those statements from the Trump administration.
The ones where he openly talked about restoring and exploding Venezuela's oil infrastructure.
At the same time, he was saying the U.S. would oversee the country's transition. That transparency, whether he meant it to be or not, just pours fuel on the classic criticism of interventionism.
For any critic, that's the smoking gun. It's the proof.
It's the proof that says, You didn't risk a global crisis for justice. You risked it for resources. It reframes the entire operation, no matter how strong the narco-terrorism charges might be.
And we have to look at the objective facts here. Venezuela has some of the largest proven oil reserves on Earth.
And that infrastructure has been crumbling for years under mismanagement and sanctions. Restoring it and bringing that oil back to the international market, that has massive strategic implications.
For global energy prices, for U.S. refineries, it's a huge economic prize.
It is. And if the U.S. is seriously signaling it will run the country, even for a short time, that control goes way beyond just politics.
It means control over the core economic engine of the country.
Think about what that means, practically. It means the U.S. can dictate who runs the state oil company, PDVSA. They can oversee the security of pipelines and export terminals.
And ultimately, they control who gets to buy that oil on the international market.
It's a control mechanism powerful enough to reshape the entire regional energy map. This action, by definition, is geopolitical chess. It's designed to restructure a hostile state's economy and secure access to critical energy assets.
The oil angle provides the context. It's the strategic why that explains why Washington was willing to take these immense legal and military risks.
Which brings us to our final segment, the investigative checklist. The biggest, most dangerous questions that are still unanswered, and what you, listening to this, need to be thinking about as this all unfolds.
All right, we've laid out what happened. Now for the crucial unknowns. The questions that will really determine where this crisis goes next.
First question on the checklist. What was the exact legal basis for the military strikes? Did the administration try to claim some broad interpretation of self-defense?
Like saying Maduro's alleged narco-terrorism was an imminent threat to the U.S.
Maybe. Or will they just stick to this completely unprecedented argument that a domestic indictment justifies unilateral force? We need to see the precise legal memo the White House is using.
Because the outcome of that legal argument is world-changing. If they make that stick, international relations are fundamentally altered.
Second question. What precisely is in the indictment? We know the headline charge is narco-terrorism, but we need the specifics of the evidence.
The New York courtroom is where the legitimacy of this whole thing will be decided.
Exactly. Can the prosecution present hard, irrefutable evidence? We're talking financial records, confessions from insiders, actual proof of drug shipments. Will they validate the official U.S. narrative?
Or will the evidence turn out to be weak or circumstantial and just blow massive holes in the whole rationale?
Right. It's the proportionality argument. If the evidence seems thin, the massive military action looks like nothing more than a pretext for a resource grab.
Third question, and this one is fascinating. Who on the inside helped them? Who enabled this?
An operation of this scale requires internal help. It's almost impossible otherwise. So who inside Venezuela betrayed Maduro? Were there military commanders who stood down their troops, who fed them the intelligence?
Finding those collaborators will tell us everything about the internal fragility of that regime.
It's the key piece of the puzzle that links the tactical success to the political preparation. Someone had to give them the final, actionable intelligence.
Okay, fourth question, and this is maybe the most urgent one right now.
Who?
Who truly controls Venezuela's armed forces?
The most pressing stability question, for sure. With Maduro gone and Rodriguez stepping in, is the military unified behind her? Or are we seeing factions breaking off and seizing control of their own regions or assets?
Because if the military fractures, the risk of a full-blown civil war just skyrockets.
And the U.S. intervention becomes the trigger for a much broader, bloodier conflict.
Fifth, what will Venezuela's allies actually do?
Condemnation from Moscow and Beijing is a given. That's just words. But will they escalate to a material response?
Meaning what? Financial aid? Military assistance to the interim government?
Maybe. Or direct actions to complicate things for the U.S. cyber interference, economic pressure somewhere else in the world. The actions of Russia and China will really define the ceiling of this crisis.
And finally, the big one, question 6. Is this a one-off or is this a new doctrine?
We've seen the precedent get set. The world now has to live with the fact that the U.S. has used military force to seize a head of state based on a domestic charge.
So every other non-aligned or hostile state is now reassessing its own security.
They have to be. They're wondering if they could be next. If their leader crosses a red line defined not by international law, but by a U.S. federal prosecutor.
That's the real legacy of this action, isn't it? A massive increase in global tension and a fundamental shift in the willingness to use force to bypass international law.
The events of January 4th, 2026 really mark a significant and potentially very dangerous turning point in global affairs.
So, to sum up, a sitting Venezuelan leader is in a U.S. federal jail cell in New York, taken there by a military operation that was dressed up as an arrest. The world is now watching to see if the legal story holds up, and what or who will fill the vacuum he left behind. The future of Venezuela, and maybe the future of sovereignty itself, is being written as we speak.
And for those who want to dig deeper, I'd suggest looking into the structure of the Venezuelan opposition to understand why it's remained so fragmented. Also, a detailed analysis of the U.S.-Venezuela escalation that led to this moment. And maybe a study of past political transitions in oil-rich states to see what the chances of success really are here.
Knowledge is critical when the rules of the game are changing this fast. Until our next deep dive, keep asking the hard questions.